There's a lot of things I have really loved over the years, but one of the most interesting properties that I haven't talked about as much, despite my love for it, is one of the most popular movie franchises of all time. That's right, it's time to talk about Star Wars. Since 1977, Star Wars has been a prominent figure in the movie world. And to say that it isn't a worldwide phenomenon would be an understatement. For good reason, as the original Star Wars trilogy is one of the best movie trilogies of all time in my opinion. Ever since I saw these movies at a young age back in the 90s, I've always been fond of this epic space adventure with all the cool worlds and characters it inhabits. These movies don't just mean a lot to me, but other people as well, as over the decades, many generations of all different backgrounds have come to appreciate this galaxy far, far away in some capacity. I mean, everyone loves Star Wars, right? Yeah, it has not been a good past couple of years for Star Wars for a lot of people. What was once a franchise that everyone thought could do no wrong has now become a subject of constant ridicule. I hate to admit it, but I kinda also have fallen off of the Star Wars bandwagon. There could be a lot of factors to it. Some would say it's because of how oversaturated the property has become, or how fans have become needlessly toxic over this simple space adventure. While those are definitely things to consider, I wouldn't quite say they're the main reason why people have been burnt out on Star Wars. Well, for the most part. I think the thing that really gave Star Wars a bad omen for a lot of people, myself included, is the simple fact that this series has been diminishing in quality for quite some time now. Not to say that every Star Wars project post-trilogy has been bad, but there has been so much subpar Star Wars stuff that the series has lost its magic. While I do have a fondness for the original trilogy and other things related to Star Wars, I don't get that same level of excitement I do for a new Star Wars project as much as I used to. But what was the breaking point that made me and a lot of other fans disinterested in something we used to love so dearly? Some may say it was the prequel trilogy, and the massive disappointment those were. Others say it was just Disney getting carried away with too many Star Wars projects for their own good. Some may even say it started with the Ewoks from Return of the Jedi. While those reasons might be valid for a lot of people, for me, this disconnection from Star Wars can really be pointed back to one movie. A Star Wars movie that disappointed me so much that it made me lose faith in this property. And it's one that got talked about quite a bit during the second half of the 2010s. I kind of have some fears making this video because I know plenty of people who actually like this movie. But I am sorry, I simply have to express my dislike for something that really put a sour taste in my mouth for any future Star Wars installment. I guess I procrastinated long enough, so here we go. I don't like Solo: A Star Wars Story. What? Yep, not a fan of this movie at all. Oh, wait, you thought I was going to talk about The Last Jedi, weren't you? Well, this may come as a shock, as I'm not going to be reviewing that controversial and heavily talked about second installment of the new trilogy. There are a few reasons for this. The first of which is, well, I had to make some sort of April Fool's video this year, so this is it! Second of all, you know how many videos have been made about Star Wars: The Last Jedi? Yeah, way too fucking many. This horse has been beaten to death more times than I could count. So I don't think I need to add another video on how The Last Jedi ruined Star Wars, because that genre of video is oversaturated as it is. And finally, the main reason I'm not reviewing this movie, at least not in a negative light that is that honestly, when it comes to this movie in particular, I don't think The Last Jedi is actually that bad of a movie. For the most part, Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Star Wars The Last Jedi either, as I have my fair shares of issues with that film, as much as the next guy. However, as far as it being the worst thing Star Wars has to offer, it's not that at all in my opinion. There are things to appreciate about this movie, even in the mix of its many problems that I do have with it. So I do think the hate for this movie has been a bit excessive. The odd thing is, whenever I hear the discourse about how Rian Johnson ruined people's childhood with this one film, when the topic of Solo, a Star Wars story comes up, the same people who rag on The Last Jedi go, "Oh yeah, Solo, a Star Wars story. That movie's alright." Well, I'm sorry, but no. Just no. I can't really agree with you guys on this. The way people felt Last Jedi was the starting point to Star Wars' massive downfall is honestly how I felt about Solo when I watched it for the first time. I'm shocked at hearing so little disdain for this movie because this is the movie that lacks a lot of what makes this series so good to me in the first place. I apologize to fans of Solo, but this will not be a positive review, as this April Fool's Day, I'm going to talk about the massive disappointment for me that was Solo, a Star Wars story. More like Solo, a suck-ass story, am I right? The film starts much like every other Star Wars movie, with the iconic text. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
But no title crawl, oh wow!
Yeah, you don't get a title crawl in this movie, but you do get another batch of text that gives you a bit of backstory. That it was a lawless time where crime is rampant, and that a young rebel is fighting for his life against the foul Lady Proxima. Of course, this young rebel who yearns to fly among the stars is none other than the legendary outlaw, Han Solo, played by Alden Ehrenreich. We see him on this planet called Corellia, as he has an early partner named Kira, played by Emilia Clarke. These two are outlaws trying to escape from this gang led by this strange creature known as Lady Proxima. They do eventually escape, only for them to get caught in the mix of the Imperial forces, led by the Empire. Their escape plans ends up leaving them separated, as Han ends up joining the Imperial Navy due to his skills with flight, all while promising Kira that he'll return for her eventually. A simple setup for a story like this that could have made for a decent Star Wars adventure. However, we don't get that here. Not because the idea of a movie about Han Solo is dead on arrival, like many might have assumed prior to this movie release. Any movie can work as long as the execution of that concept can end up making a really engaging and enjoyable movie. Solo, a Star Wars story is not one of those movies. This is because when watching the movie, a good majority of this film, in my experience, can be described in one word. One simple little word that sums up a movie on the level of quality of something like Solo, a Star Wars story, perfectly.
This is...
What?
This is boring.
Yes, boring. That is the number one problem I have with this movie. Solo is honestly just a boring movie, as whenever I watch this movie, I find it to be such a drag of a film that nearly puts me to sleep due to how uninteresting it is. But how is it boring, you may ask? Clearly a sci-fi adventure with Han Solo and Chewie can make for an exciting movie, right? Well, that's not the case. And part of the reason is due to how the film is directed. Now, something that has been discussed extensively in the past is that this movie had quite a bit of production trouble. See, as evident in recent years with the downfall of quality Star Wars movies had, there didn't seem to be a set game plan for their movies.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Leading Disney to shuffle around and change a lot of their films due to fan reception. This definitely was the case with Solo, as the film was initially directed by the duo of Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Admittedly, that sounds pretty promising to hear that these guys are going to be attached to this film. If anyone can make a Han Solo movie good, it would definitely be the guys who made the Lego movie. The downside was their version of the film did not match to what Disney wanted to have. And things did not help when the divisive reception of Star Wars The Last Jedi came out. This ended up leading Disney to become very micromanagement when it came to their future Star Wars movies. Solo was included in that, as midway through production, Lord and Miller were kicked off of the project, leading to them never completing their original version of the film. It's a shame really, because maybe we could have gotten a great movie in their works, at least one that was more exciting and enjoyable than the one we ended up getting. Though I won't hold my breath that we'll actually get the Lord and Miller cut of Solo: A Star Wars Story anytime soon. Not because of the whole director's cut of poor production movies ship had sail after the debacle that was the Snyder Cut, but also because, well, quite frankly, Lord and Miller don't seem to have the best reputation right now. So I doubt we'll get a cut of their film release. So with Lord and Miller out of the picture, Disney had no choice but to bring in other acclaimed filmmaker, Ron Howard. Yeah, Ron Howard, of all people, was set to direct the film. Though, I don't want to act like I dislike Ron Howard, because he has been involved with a lot of stuff I like. He has directed some good, and even great films in his filmography. So it's not like the man isn't capable of directing a good Star Wars movie. Hell, ironically enough, his daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, was in charge of directing some of the best episodes of Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. So, I don't think it was the worst idea to bring him on. However, sometimes with Ron Howard, as talented as he is as a director at points, he can also be a work of hire sort of director. A lot have claimed that he doesn't quite have a distinct directing style compared to other directors, and it did unfortunately lead to a few movies not being all that good from him. This movie definitely being one of them. It's a shame, because Ron could have probably bring something good to this movie if it wasn't such a last minute decision to bring him on as a director. Really the only thing that came out that was good dealing with Ron Howard in this movie was that promotional video of him recapping the Star Wars trilogy and Arrested Development style.
It's a ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
Hey, that would make an interesting movie. Go see Solo: A Star Wars Story, only in theaters May 25th.
So what is it about the directing that doesn't work despite being from a fairly competent director? Well, just by looking at it, Solo is just an honestly ugly looking movie, if you ask me. You know how Star Wars movies, even some of the weaker ones, tend to have striking images that pop out? You don't get that here. Instead, you get a film that is really dark, as the whole color scheme of this film is just filled with dull grays and browns that doesn't stick out in a positive light at all. The worst part is, I can tell from a production standpoint that this wasn't done with minimal effort. There are some really neat looking sets and cool creature designs here that I want to appreciate, but the film is so dimly lit, I can barely make out what I'm supposed to be looking at. Disney has had a bad habit in recent memory of having this bland gray color palette in a lot of their projects, even ones that are actually pretty good. And I think Solo was the start of that trend of dull looking Disney projects. Now, some of you might defend this decision by saying, well, it's because the movie is showcasing the takeover of the Empire, so the dark, depressing color palette is fitting for this. Which, that's a fair point, I guess. Just one problem. We've seen the other Star Wars movies that take place around this time, and they don't look like this. There was color in the original trilogy. There was even color in Rogue One. This doesn't need to look this grayscale. Even taking the Empire taking over, adding to this dark, depressing look, the visual aesthetic doesn't fit the tone of the movie. This is a movie that's trying to have an upbeat, fun tone in the vein of some of the original Star Wars movies and Indiana Jones, which I'm not against at all. But it's hard to have fun with this kind of movie when the film looks more like a Zack Snyder DC movie. Honestly, even Zack Snyder did a better job with the look of his DC movies. Look, say what you will about some of his movies, but at least the dark, grim look matched the tone of the movie he was striving for. This doesn't at all. Why does this movie look so fucking dark? I see no purpose in this. Clearly the film could have some really good writing that could make up for any shortcomings the visual direction has, right?
Nope.
Yeah, not really. You'd think they would have a decent script given that you got a writer who has worked on great Star Wars movies in the past. But this is not a strong script in my opinion. It's mainly because this film is rarely that engaging from a character's perspective, as a lot of these characters, old and new, fall flat on their faces. I guess no better way to start when talking about the characters than with Han Solo himself. We all love the guy in the original trilogy, dashing bounty hunter who has a way with words, played ever so gracefully by Harrison Ford. He may ultimately be a side character, and maybe not the most in-depth development-wise compared to some of the other characters, but the movies do a good job of making him grow a bit as a character in the mix of his fun personality. There's a lot to say in terms of why I don't think this version of Solo works, but one thing I won't be shitting on in terms of this character is Alden Ehrenreich. Now, obviously they were going to cast someone else as a young Han Solo, but prior to this movie coming out, this actor got a lot of flack for playing as the character, and I feel bad for him. I've seen this guy in other movies, and I don't think he's a bad actor in the slightest. Not saying his performance in Solo is Oscar-worthy, or even that he would have been my first pick for Han Solo. Who would I pick instead? Honestly, this guy, Anthony Ingruber. I think that's how you pronounce it. Who is he, you ask? Well, the only movie I have seen him in is this film called The Age of Adeline. Not a great movie in my opinion, but the one thing that actually stood out to me is that Harrison Ford appears in this movie, and the movie flashes back to his past self, where he's played by Ingruber. Now, the crazy thing is, well, just look at him. He looks almost exactly like Harrison Ford. I almost thought this was CG considering how scarily similar looking he looks to the actor, but nope, this is just a guy who happens to look and sound just like Harrison Ford. It seemed like they had a perfect fit, but alas we got Alden. But for what it's worth, I thought the performance he gave as Han was fine. He does manage to emulate the character's slimy, rebellious personality fairly well, as I do admittedly buy him as Solo for the most part in this. So I don't think the hate for him is justified in regards to his performance. The same cannot be said for the way the character is written, however. Han Solo in this movie is not that interesting in this, and some might say because the nature of taking a side character and making a movie that solely focuses on them is a bad idea to begin with. Though I don't think that's entirely true. I could maybe see where the ideas of a Han Solo origin story could have potential. There can be a way of adding more layers to this character by giving this character an arc of how he became the well-renowned bounty hunter he is today. You can give him a bit of a journey where he might not start out as the great hero he is, but over time we see him develop those skills that we know him for. We see how he becomes a smooth talker, how he becomes the best pilot in the whole galaxy, and how he manages to be this skillful hero on his own. Yeah, the movie doesn't do that at all. Instead, Han Solo just feels a bit one note. Like he's already this ultimate bounty hunter character, and we don't get a real progression of how he became that bounty hunter. There's no sense of pathos to Han's story in this because it's just throwing us into this adventure with him, without really showing us how he became the hero he is outside of minor things. Sure, the movie constantly say he's the best pilot.
I'm gonna be a pilot. Best in the galaxy.
But I'm a great pilot.
But wouldn't it have been more interesting if we saw him struggle retain those skills and then he becomes the best pilot around? Especially since one of the most common rules of storytelling is show don't tell. And this movie certainly doesn't follow that rule. The only thing that's somewhat worth of note for Han in this is that they added a new love interest with Kira. But even that falls flat. She's a character we barely know anything about, and the relationship is hard to get invested in because we know he's not going to get with her somehow. They tried to make her and Han have chemistry in the vein of him and Leia, but again, the original trilogy showcased that progression of how they became this dynamic duo. Here, it starts out with them as a couple, and we're not given that much to what makes these two click, and it feels more unfulfilling when we already know the outcome. The way Han Solo's story plays out here, especially knowing that he's going to be fine in the end, ultimately is one of the big issues to why this movie doesn't work for me. And it's something that's a common crutch to a lot of bad Star Wars movies. It's the simple fact that I don't care. The worst Star Wars movies are the ones where I don't feel like I care what's going to happen due to how the story doesn't have a main hook with its characters. And it's just an excuse to show iconography of Star Wars stuff without any real substance. The film really could have avoided this problem if they just gave me more of a reason to care about watching the origins of Han Solo. But no, instead of an interesting character piece of how an iconic bounty hunter came to be, they gave us stupid shit like this.
What's your name, son?
Han.
What?
Don't do it. Don't do it.
I don't have people.
I swear, better not fucking do it.
Solo.
Lame, 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 lame!
Yeah, instead of getting something that would be very impactful to this character of Han Solo, we get instead an explanation of how he got his name. And it's honestly one of the stupidest scenes I have ever seen in a Star Wars movie. You know how some movies early on, there tends to be that one moment that manages to be a sign that you're watching a bad movie? Well, this moment in Solo is when the movie completely lost me. Of all the things you could have showcased in this movie, why of all things did you decide that we had to know how Han Solo got his name? It's starting to be a common trend in a lot of bad movies that are origin stories of other characters, is that rather than being an interesting journey of how the character came to be, they just feel the need to give us pointless explanations to stuff no one asked for. This stuff is honestly some of the most pandering shit you can do in a movie because it spells things out to the audience. Like, they wouldn't know stuff that seems self-explanatory or didn't really need an explanation to begin with. We can figure this out on our own. This doesn't work. It didn't work in the Super Mario Brothers movie with how the Mario Brothers got their name.
It's Mario and Luigi Mario.
It didn't work with how Cruella got her name and all the stupid other shit that bad Cruella movie felt to needlessly explain to us.
It's spelled devil, but it's pronounced devil.
And it doesn't work here.
Good luck, Han Solo.
Yeah, like, why can't he just be named Solo? You don't need an explanation. But no, you had to spell it out in the most contrived way, as Han Solo gets his name because
He's all alone.
what makes it worse is that why of all characters did Han decide to keep his name given to him by some random guard that has little to no impact in this movie? Seriously, this guy doesn't even have a name, and yet he's the one to give Han Solo his own name? I don't know about you, but I don't think I would keep the name given to me by some dude working for the bad guys. If the name was given by a character who actually had some sort of impact on Han, that'd be one thing. But no, they had to go with the most insignificant character as possible for this scene, which makes this scene so dumb. It's not clever or adds anything significant to the movie. It's just contrived and stupid. God, I hate this movie. Anyway, after that stupid sequence, we then cut to 3 years later, where we see Han being a part of the war for the Empire. Though maybe not the right choice of having this be such a massive time skip, as it probably would have been interesting to see Han interact with other characters and grow during this massive time. But no, we don't even get like a montage over time. It's just straight to 3 years later. Han instead starts finally interacting with his new team, who's planning to escape from the Empire. They're led by Tobias Beckett, played by Woody Harrelson. Now, I really like Woody Harrelson as an actor, but this is not one of his better roles. Not because he does a bad job, it's just the character doesn't really have a lot to work with. He's just a rebellious leader, and the kind of crazy sense of humor that Harrelson can be known for isn't really seen here. Honestly, I found his character of Cletus the slack-jaw yokel Carnage more interesting than this. Oh yeah, and there are 2 other characters a part of this group. We'll get to them in a moment. But first, we get to see Han interact with a familiar friend. Something to be expected in a movie like this is how Chewie and Han Solo met. And you know, I actually don't mind this moment. I mean, in this movie, Chewie is Chewie. He's the same lovable hairy Wookiee we all know and love. This wasn't too hard to screw up. Their first meeting is actually kind of enjoyable, and the only real bit of heart I kind of like in this movie is their interactions. It's not enough to save the film, but the makings of a compelling narrative are seen here at least. It's funny to also see Han know the language of the Wookiees apparently too, so not much to complain about here.
Yeah, I speak a little.
We then see this new team form, led by Beckett, and it leads to them going on a mission to get some coaxium on what is essentially a space train. It leads to an action sequence where they not only have to get through this train, but also have to go against these space pirates who put a huge damper on their plans. This sequence would be neat, as it has a neat idea for a set piece. And the space pirates designs, they're not too bad. Yet again, it looks so visually grayscale and doesn't really feel that substantial in the grand scheme of things that I don't feel a lot with this sequence. Yet it's a sequence that does actually have a few losses, as 2 of Beckett's crew members get killed. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention these 2 characters that were a part of the crew, and that's because the movie introduces them as quickly as they are essentially disposed of them. I'm not against having certain characters die off early in a film. It adds to the stakes of the threats within the movie. However, if you're going to do that, try to attempt to get a sense of personality or development with these characters. To bring up a good movie that does this, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, it killed off a bunch of characters within the first 10 minutes. But even then, you get a better sense of camaraderie and personalities with these characters from just these few moments alone. It also helps that they're not entirely new, with one returning character, and all of them being based on comic characters too. So there's merit to them even within their short-lived screen time. Here, I'm just introduced to these 2 characters, and I know practically nothing about them other than their role in the film. If the film showcased the 3 years these characters have gone through, maybe we could have got to know them more. Instead, they're just introduced as a part of the team, we barely get a sense of their personality, and then they just die. Oh no, how horrible! Lady who was dating Beckett? Oh no, that's awful! Not forearm CGI alien voiced by Jon Favreau. Seriously, who are these guys? And if you think I'm just overreacting, even the actress playing Beckett's partner felt they did these characters dirty. Because let's face it, having new characters in Star Wars is honestly welcome. And to see what could have been memorable characters that have an impact to the film, and also add to an actor's filmography in a memorable way, is something that should be encouraged. But no, we just have to stick with the same old iconography and shit we don't need explanation for. Yeah, this is still not an exciting Star Wars story yet. After that mishap with the train heist, Beckett reveals he was hired by this crime boss to steal the coaxium, and they all decide to find a different shipment of coaxium in order for Beckett's life to be saved. They eventually arrive at the crime boss's base, and Han sees a familiar face with Kira, who is now working for the same person that Beckett is working for. I know I've talked about unmemorable, uninteresting characters in this movie, but I have to at least address another big problem I have with this movie from a character's perspective. And that is the main villain of this movie. This might be, in my honest opinion, the absolute worst Star Wars villain I have ever seen. Why? Well, tell me. What do you remember about this guy as a character? Oh yeah, the crime boss. There was that great scene with him where he... Yeah, you see the problem with this dude? This guy is barely a character. He's just stated as the threat of the movie being a crime boss of this planet, and there's nothing else to it. I don't remember a single thing about this dude, as I can barely figure out what his personality is supposed to be other than evil crime boss. He has no presence whatsoever, and even his design is boring. The only thing I remember about this character was the fact that he was played by Vision, which, no disrespect to Paul Bettany, he's a good actor, but this character has nothing to offer for me. Hell, I don't even remember this dude's name. He's so forgettable. In fact, let me look it up right now to see what his name is. Let's see. Bad guy villain name. Dryden Voss. Yeah, this character sucks. Every other Star Wars villain had at least something to them, even if it wasn't always in a movie. There was at least a personality or an interesting design they had to them. This character has nothing. Yeah, this is another reason why I don't care about anything that's going on in this movie story-wise. I know I've ragged on this movie quite a bit, but is there anything I like about it? Well, believe it or not, there are a few things I don't completely hate. Let's see, the music's pretty decent. Okay, in a series like Star Wars, where we have tracks like the Duels of Fate, in a movie like The Phantom Menace, good music in a Star Wars movie seems like a given. But that doesn't change the fact that the music here is not too bad. Some of the new themes in this are kind of memorable, as I still think about that space pirate theme that isn't too bad. Plus, when the music does go back to the older Star Wars themes, it's really fun to hear and utilize fairly well. Probably my actual favorite element of the music in this movie actually appears early on. When Han first arrives at the Empire's base, we hear a heroic remix of the Imperial March.
Explore new worlds. Learn valuable skills.
Now, that's actually a pretty nice touch. It showcases how the Empire has control in the galaxy now by taking one of the most iconic villain theme songs and turning it into something that paints these villains in a positive light in this world. Small stuff like that I can actually appreciate. So, John Powell, you did a good job when it came to your contribution to this movie. Although I guess while we're on the topic of things I actually like about Solo: A Star Wars Story, we eventually get to see Han and the gang arrive on a new planet, as they have a new plan to go to Kessel and get some coaxium there, to which Kira leads them to not only a new recruit to the team, but probably the only character in this whole movie I give a shit about. Good old Lando Calrissian. Now I think everyone loves Lando, as how can you not like the guy? He's like another cool, smooth-talking smuggler, but one that has the great presence of Billy D. Williams, giving this character some life. Plus, I've always liked the dynamic between Han and Lando in the original Star Wars trilogy, so him being here is actually welcoming. Poor Billy D, though. He always gets the short end of the stick when it comes to being a prevalent part of Star Wars, with him barely appearing in the new trilogy despite how cool Lando is.
This deal is getting worse all the time.
Fortunately, they actually did a pretty perfect casting job, as they got my man Donald Glover to play as Lando.
Hey.
Now, I love me some good old Donald Glover, as he's always has this lovable presence or chillness to nearly most of the roles he plays in. How can you not love Troy from Community? And him being cast as a young Lando was honestly pretty fitting for him. I know some say his performance comes across a little too much like an impression, but I don't feel it here. I think he emulates Lando's smooth and chill attitude so well. And to be fair, I actually like the scenes with him and Han Solo. Those card playing sequences are actually kind of engaging, and it's the one part of the movie I can actually get a kick out of. Really, it only makes me wish this movie, rather than adding a bunch of new characters that barely make any sort of impact, they just set more of a focus on Han, Chewie, and Lando. These guys have a good dynamic, and maybe a whole movie about them going on an adventure wouldn't make this movie feel so overstuffed with pointlessness. Though, even with this movie still falling flat as a whole in spite of the addition of Donald Glover, this movie is still not the worst thing Donald Glover has appeared in. So, I'm glad we have him here. Really, the only downside to his character here is another problem this movie has, and that is another not-so-good character being added into the mix.
Using you for entertainment!
This time, we get the addition of an android as a partner for Lando, known as L337. Now, I'll give her this. She isn't as bad as some of the other characters here for me, and that's partially because they do give her a bit more of a personality this time. However, it's actually kind of an annoying one, as L3 is just kind of a whiny character that just doesn't seem like that good of an addition to the team. It's a shame because I like the idea of a female droid, and one that's rebellious against the Empire, along with being for a robot uprising. It's a neat idea for a character. I even think her design and the effects work are done quite well here. But there's not really that much to her character outside of the fact that she has a vendetta against humans, and she goes about it disgruntled the whole way through. She's just not that great of a character, and it's a shame because the droid characters in the more recent Star Wars movies have been a bit likable, so it's a shame to see this one not be that great. The only thing I like about her is her fate, and no, it's not because she dies.
What's happening to me?
It's actually because her life force essence, or whatever, becomes attached to the Millennium Falcon, which means she essentially becomes the ship.
She's part of the ship now.
honestly kind of a neat little play on a movie trend that Star Wars also does, where they refer to their ride as my girl, and that she's the best.
What a piece of junk.
She'll make 0.5 past light speed. She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
I actually do like that this does add meaning to them referring to the Falcon as a she, as it's actually based on a person that Lando had a connection with. Therefore, it makes sense that they refer to the Falcon as a she. I don't know, I just find that kind of neat. I mean, I don't have a lot to work with her. You got a character that's trying to be progressive and independent that is so outspoken in this film, yet this film doesn't even pass the Bechdel test. Seriously, the main conversation L3 and Kira have in this movie is about how L3 has the hots for Lando.
I'm sure you've noticed that Lando has feelings for me, because I do not feel the same way about him. Sometimes I think, maybe.
Now for the record, I'm not saying that the Bechdel test is a measurement of quality of film, or even in terms of how feminist or progressive a movie is. I just find that rather ironic. However, on the bright side of things, we are getting to more parts of the movie I actually kind of like, as the whole team goes to Kessel to free the Wookiees and the robot slaves captured on it, which honestly leaves to the one section of the movie that's kind of fun. This whole sequence is fairly enjoyable, as it's a fun, simple heist and chase through Kessel, with a variety of set pieces during this moment. It does still suffer from the poor lighting and color palette, but I still get a good sense of fun in this moment, thanks to some of the character interactions being not too bad, and even gets more fun when it goes to the space battle. Highlighted even further is classic Star Wars tunes appearing, where, as manipulative as it can be, it does fit very appropriately here. It also has a big giant creature, more Lando as we all know and love, and who doesn't love a good robot uprising?
Yeah, stupid robots! I order you to go out there and to be free!
Shortly after all of that, however, we see Lando, Han, Kira, and the rest finishing up their mission, returning to the main bad guy's hideout to return the coaxium. This leads Lando to leave them behind, and Han and Kira to wrap up their mission. Now, this is an issue because, honestly, the last set piece was kind of a good finale to end off the movie. I mean, look at something like Rogue One. Sure, the movie wasn't perfect, but its finale was a great way to end off the movie in an epic fashion. The Kessel Run isn't nearly as good as the third act of that film, but it represents the fun nature a movie like this that I agree with fans of this movie should be. What's the problem, however? Well, there's still a damn good 40 minutes of the film left. This has a fourth act that goes on longer than it needs to, when it could have wrapped this shit up sooner, as it's not character growth, it's just exposition. Now, some people accuse other films of having a fourth act, particularly Christopher Nolan with Oppenheimer and The Dark Knight. While it is true that they felt like they were wrapping up sooner rather than later, but here's the thing, they still made things interesting. Seeing the impact of what the invention of the atomic bomb did for Oppenheimer's psyche and the world was interesting. Joker's plan on the boat and the downfall of Harvey Dent was also interesting. This bullshit heist with characters I barely care about and know that they're going to make it out alive is not interesting. My God, why is this movie so boring?
When they returned demanding their tribute, the people shouted,
Boring! When did things get boring again?
Yeah, so the space pirates return and help out Han, I guess, and they all come across the main bad guy once again. Not before Beckett says his goodbyes and parts his way with them. Gee, I hope he's not working for the bad guy. Oh, wait.
Fool you!
Yeah, not surprisingly, this movie acts like it's a big twist, but come on. This is a character I barely know, and also don't get a strong sense of attachment to. Sorry, Woody, you deserve better than this. It does lead to a bland final confrontation with the bad guy, where Beckett ends up taking Chewie hostage, so Han has to chase after him. Not before Kira kills the main bad guy, leading her to say her goodbye to Han, and good luck on his further adventures. But again, totally not working for the bad guys, right? Oh wait, she is. It seems he's working for the Emperor this time, as we get a message from him.
Is that so? Where is the shipment?
Wait a second. That sounds nothing like Emperor Palpatine. Either they really fucked up with the voice of that character, or by some chance this is a completely new character altogether. Yeah, Darth Maul from The Phantom Menace returns, as Kira is working for his underground crime facility. What, is that supposed to make me suddenly like this movie now? Because it doesn't. Now I will admit, I was taken a bit off guard by this when I first saw this movie, as I wasn't really expecting this. However, not for the reason you would think, because most people wouldn't expect Darth Maul to show up in the new Star Wars thing because, quite frankly, last we saw of him, he was half off. So obviously people who didn't look into other Star Wars mediums outside of the movies would presume he's dead. So most people weren't expecting him to be referenced. For me, it's not that the character was killed off that made me surprised by his appearance, but more so how the prequels are treated by Disney and audiences at that point. You all act like the prequels by George Lucas are these underappreciated masterpieces now after all this shit, but not back in the 2010s. I was there for the Red Letter Media reviews. The prequel hate was incredibly strong, and I think Disney and the people behind current Star Wars at the time were aware of that. When the marketing of The Force Awakens appeared, the imagery was more fixated on classic Star Wars stuff, with more of the designs and effects work being done in the vein of the classic movies. There was barely any mention of the prequels in regards to these newer movies. It seemed like everyone wanted to distance themselves from the prequels as much as possible.
This will begin to make things right.
Which means no references to anything related to it, even the things people like in that era. It wasn't until this movie we get a full acknowledgement from Disney that the prequels are still a part of this canon. Now sure, some may argue Rogue One had the upper edge, as it did feature
Basil Oregano, played by Jimmy Smits!
Which, yes, he was a character featured in the prequels, and played by the same actor. But remember,
he's Princess Leia's non-biological father!
Meaning that even if the prequels didn't exist, this character would still be significant, since it's a character tied into a major character of the original trilogy. This time, we got a character made for the prequels and primarily associated with those movies featured as a full-fledged cameo. This must be kinda cool, at least, to see Darth Maul here for all those prequel fans. But here's the thing, it isn't. Why? Because it adds absolutely nothing to the movie. It's just a glorified cameo and nothing else. Now, if Darth Maul actually did anything in this movie, like, I don't know, interact with Han Solo, the guy that this damn movie is about, that would be interesting. But no, he just shows up and looks threatening to potentially appear in the next installment of Star Wars. This movie doesn't add anything substantial to an already nothing villain in The Phantom Menace, outside of giving him more than just 2 lines, and his film and total quotes are now up to 5, I guess. Now I know some of you are already typing in the comments right now, well, if you actually watched the Clone Wars animated series, you would know that Darth Maul is actually one of the greatest bad guys to ever grace the Star Wars saga. Well, I got news for you, pal. I have watched Star the Clone Wars, the series. And you know, it's pretty damn good. One thing I will say is that Darth Maul fans have some merit when it comes to this character on this show, as he is actually kind of interesting here. Rather than being a simple bad guy, he goes a more rebellious solo mode, and managed to gain some power in this galaxy without any real help from the Empire. He's actually threatening and does have a presence in the show. My only hot take is that I like Savage Opress more as a character, but that's another story. So I could say that Darth Maul is actually a decent character in the Star Wars Clone Wars CGI show. However, that's a key thing here. That's the show. This is a movie, one completely different and stands on its own as a movie, at least It should, as even taking how cool Maul is on the show, it still doesn't change the fact that this just feels out of place and undeserving that this character suddenly appears in this movie. Even when he does appear, it amounts to practically nothing to the character outside of the fact that he just shows up. This wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for this unfortunate reality for me and so many others, and that's the simple fact that all of these glorified cameos, that's all Star Wars is now.
Did you clap at any of the new moments and memorable characters?
Were there any?
No!
It's just referencing a thing from a previous movie or whatever, putting emphasis on how this character or thing is here and do absolutely nothing with it. They don't have time to flesh out and develop new characters, only for them to just show off an already existing character and doing nothing with them. So, no, I don't think a movie that has already been so boring isn't automatically made better because, oh my god guys, Darth Maul showed up. Wasn't it so cool that he showed up and did the thing with his lightsaber? No, it's not. It's tacky and boring. I want to go home now. Luckily, we are getting close to home as we have one more confrontation with Han and Beckett. Beckett starts chatting, and wouldn't you know it, Han shot him. Because everyone knows Han shot first. Except not really, because you can't watch the original version where he does shoot first. Some of you might be aware of this, but in case you haven't known, you can't watch the original version of the Star Wars trilogy that were released theatrically. This is because back in 1997, George Lucas re-released the films with brand new footage that they made through the advancements of CGI. This wouldn't be so bad, but there are a few things that completely ruin these added scenes to the movie. For one thing, the scenes added are not very good, as most of them are plagued by horribly dated CGI and unnecessary changes that turn otherwise well done scenes into complete jokes. Second, it wasn't enough that Lucas did this in 1997. He did more changes, again and again, within every future DVD and Blu-ray release of the films. And they don't get better. They just get worse from here. Third, and worst of all, I honestly wouldn't have that much of a problem with Lucas wanting to go back to his movies to add stuff to his initial vision. In an age where filmmakers are prevented from having their full creative ideas on screen due to executive meddling, it's cool to see a director try to showcase more of what he wanted to convey within a film. Where it completely backfires is that even with the flaws the original Star Wars movies might have, they're still perceived as great films that managed to impress even after the 70s. So there's not as much of a need for these changes. Even if that wasn't the case, the bigger problem is the only versions of Star Wars you can watch legally through streaming or official Blu-rays are the special edition updates. Because this whole thing of Han shot first came from a special edition change. Where they made it that right before Han shoots Greedo, they made it look like Greedo shot Han right before Han shoots back, and Greedo misses due to the power of a digitally shifted head. This is a special edition change that hasn't been reverted back to its original form. And it was only because Lucas was like, I didn't want Han Solo to be a cold-blooded murderer. Yet it was self-defense regardless.
When you have to shoot, shoot, don't talk.
And this movie is trying to convey that Han shot first when the movies you can watch legally right now don't even acknowledge that. I know this might be more of a rant on a different topic entirely for Star Wars. However, it becomes so disappointing that of anything I was hoping for, I was hoping that Disney, having the rights to Star Wars, would give them an opportunity to re-release the original cuts of the trilogy, remastered fully. But they haven't, and you can unless you somehow get through a bootleg copy. Apparently during the Disney Star Wars deal, Lucas was still in control on whether or not the original versions of Star Wars would get released. Despite the fact only one film of the original trilogy was directed by him, by the way. Listen, George, you honestly seem like a decent guy. I don't want to seem like I'm giving you that much shit since you probably got way more than you deserve, even if you did make Attack of the Clones. But I still hear you're a friendly guy who has done some commendable things. But this is still your biggest mistake because, come on George, There's no need to be dispossessive over movies you made when people already loved them the way they were. Just give us an option to watch your new version and the original version if you're going to make all these changes. Come on, George, please. Anyway, at least the good news is, almost done with the movie, as now it's time to finally wrap things up. We get to see Han and Chewie go back to Lando as they challenge him to another game of cards, leading to the swindle Lando out of the Falcon. This leads to Han and Chewie going on more adventures, as this is the beginning of a brand new journey of a young Han Solo with so many more. Oh wait, this movie actually flopped at the box office because it was too expensive to make and people became sick of Star Wars.
Oh well!
I applauded it for being different!
It broke new ground!
Boring. This was so boring. This was so boring. This was boring.
Solo.
Boring. Solo, a Star Wars story, misses the mark big time for me, as far as what kind of a movie a Star Wars adventure should be. While it does have its occasional fun moments, the acting is decent, and the score is well done, it's not enough to save a movie that is honestly one of the most uninteresting films I've seen in this massive franchise. Its story is by the numbers, with very little added from a character's perspective, written with moments that feel pandering for a movie of this caliber. It's plagued with a filmmaking style that's uninspired and bland, bringing nothing new to this series known for creativity in the past. But worst of all, it's just a movie where I don't care what's going on. The film isn't made in a way that feels exciting and new, and the writing barely adds any level of depth to these characters we love. And just have them go through a Star Wars story. Oh, it's a Star Wars story, alright. A generic as hell, uninspired, uninteresting Star Wars story. In other words,
it's boring as shit.
Maybe the more positive aspects of this movie got to you better than it did for me. But honestly, I just find this movie to be the start of Star Wars losing its initial touch that it once had from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So now that I finally got done with talking about Solo, I actually want to go back a little bit to The Last Jedi. You know, the movie I set myself up to review as part of an April Fool's joke. I mainly wanted to mention this film for a bit because, truth be told, even though I do think this is a better movie than Solo by a long shot, my actual feelings toward the films have, and even still today after watching this again in the mix of Solo, are very complicated. To an extent, I actually do get a lot of the criticisms of this movie, big time, because I have some of those same gripes that other people have. The movie still suffers a lot from being the type of typical modern day Star Wars movie Disney has been sort of corporizing within the past few years, and it does rear its ugly head. The humor still has quite a bit of misses, there are still major missed opportunities to where the story could have gone, and there's just a lot of moments and scenes that feel a bit unnecessary. I am sorry, but you will never convince me that this scene with Leia flying is not one of the stupidest things I have ever seen in a Star Wars movie. Aspects like these really bring this movie down big time in terms of being what I look for in a Star Wars movie. Yet, in spite of all of that, even with every single major problem this movie had, nowadays, especially given what has conspired with every Star Wars project after this, I can't help but grow a major appreciation for what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. I can go on about how much didn't work about this movie for me, but in the grand scheme of things, I still willingly go back to it more because it did give me so much that I look for in a Star Wars movie. The conflict regarding Rey, Kylo, and Luke is still so fascinating, and a unique exploration of old and new characters for a franchise like this. It doesn't do it perfectly, but it still managed to be such an engaging new take on these characters that created for a compelling narrative that has insightful themes of failure and learning to embrace changes that occur over time through how values and morals evolve within a person. It does things very unconventionally for a Star Wars movie, but that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, because it made me more intrigued by how they were going to handle these new ideas to expand this galaxy from far, far away. In other words, unlike recent Star Wars projects, I actually care what's going on in this movie. Maybe not everything, but more so than other recent projects, honestly. I care what's going to ultimately happen to these characters and this world that I already love through my admiration of the original trilogy. It also helps that looking back, there's so much of this movie that actually does feel bold and just as grandiose as a Star Wars movie should be, thanks to an honestly very well directed movie for the most part. Sure, you might think some of the action in the newer Star Wars movies is kind of enjoyable, but with its lack of colors and not much to care about, it all ends up feeling like repetitive fluff, if you ask me. There's not a single shot in Solo: A Star Wars Story that goes as hard as some of the very best shots featured in The Last Jedi. As misguided as some of the decisions were, this was the last time that I felt that love and care Star Wars had, with the dedication that the fans and people who worked on it had. Yet, at the end of the day, that is my view on what a Star Wars movie should strive to be. And the one thing that the mixed reception between Solo and The Last Jedi managed to be a good thing for Star Wars. And that's the fact that a variety of different people across all different backgrounds can find different ways to give out that same love of Star Wars. If Solo: A Star Wars Story is your idea of a fun Star Wars movie, good for you. If The Last Jedi isn't your idea of a good Star Wars movie, also fair point, as neither of our feelings invalidate what makes a Star Wars movie so special to you. And maybe rather than argue about why Star Wars sucks, maybe there's a better alternative. Maybe instead of debating endlessly on which was the worst movie, whether it be The Last Jedi or Solo, Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones, or the prequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy, maybe emphasize all the commonality, the best of what these Star Wars movies have to offer. Despite my dislike for Solo, it's not like the movie was the worst thing out there, and the positives do stand out to where I could see where a better movie was intended. Even the harsher critics of The Last Jedi may even have a moment or two they like within the film. Despite the fact there's a literal war within the fandom to where I can't say this would ever happen anytime soon, but I think if a Star Wars project wanted to be great again, it tries to consider the best of what made each of these movies so distinct and interesting in their own right. It'll take a while, but maybe this downgrade of quality in Star Wars could lead to a break that it needs, with so much of it being oversaturated. Yet, I think through a break like this, they can take lessons learned about the previous movies, and maybe we'll get that revamp of Star Wars that is desperately needed. I mean, okay, to be fair, I still think that this series should have stayed as a standalone trilogy initially. But even then, it's not like there's not any hope for that. Even when Star Wars was at its lowest point, there were still great things to come out of the lackluster Star Wars eras. Mandalorian Season 1 and 2 were great, and even the prequel eras had some fantastic gems in the mix. Despite my annoyance of Star Wars now, I can't say there hasn't been any good Star Wars stuff recently, as Visions Season 1 and 2 were fantastic, and some of the most creative I've seen Star Wars in a long time. So maybe that's what this series needs. More freedom for their creators at hands, and more time to let that freedom happen, as having so many movies back to back wasn't working out for them, and neither are the shows. But that doesn't mean there can't be positive change. Star Wars, for better or for worse, has a legacy for a reason. It was a creative force that was able to bind people of all different backgrounds. It has changed so much over the years that so many fans have seen the best of so many eras, and what was changed about it to mix it up. Sure, it has stumbled quite a few times by now, but those stumbles can be acknowledged as a lesson to create for a greater change in the saga. It helps what makes this tale from a galaxy far, far away last a lifetime. So take that for what it's worth.
We are what they grow beyond. That is the true burden of all masters.
Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope whether or not you agree with me, you enjoyed this video regardless. Even if you happen to be someone who does like Solo and not The Last Jedi, or vice versa like myself, at least we can all agree on one thing. Both movies are way better than that piece of shit Rise of Skywalker. Thank you and good night.
Who are your people?
Mario,